Hey everybody, we recently launched pre-orders for the Dust Hightail. There's been a ton of social media about it, lots of questions. They've been directed to us. Well, it just so happens that Colin was passing through Salt Lake City, so we rang him up and we asked him to come by and talk to us and answer all these questions that are out there on social media about the Dust Hightail.
So one of the things that has been happening on social media with all the hype of taking pre-orders and the buzz is just glowing everywhere, it's just a ton of questions. Question. Everything ranging from how does it compare to a Vard, price points, weight, power output. So I thought it'd probably be good if we just start with what has changed from the alpha prototype moving into the Hightail production model.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, thanks both for having me here. So yeah, in the back of the van, as I was driving through, I had a couple of the alpha prototypes. And so if you all have been following us, you know that we've been doing a lot of testing. We've been very open with sharing the development process of, the Dust Hightail, previously known as the Model 1. And the alpha bikes were basically our first prototypes that we built. Along that journey, we've been refining the design and the specification of the bike. And so when we first started, we wanted to be relatively conservative with some of the claims that we were making so that we gave ourselves space to evolve and improve and make sure that we could hit some of the targets that we ultimately had. And so the updates that we were able to share on the Hightail when we went live with the pre-order recently, we have a larger battery than we had before. So we have a custom designed battery for Dust, which is a 4.4 kilowatt hour pack. Okay. It's 80 volt and 55 amp hour, and max discharge is up at 500 amps. And we also have developed our own custom motor gearbox combination. And that's putting output up to 42 horsepower, about 32 kilowatt. And torque at the motor is about 60 newton meters, and with the reduction that we're running for the stock bike, it's about 660 newton meters at the rear wheel. So torque has come up, power's come up, and battery capacity has come up. And ultimately, the next bikes that we'll start to build out for prototype testing will be representative of the Hightail production spec that we just shared.
So one thing that we showed in our last video when we got a chance to ride the bike is really the size. The playful, flickable, fun nature of a mid-sized bike, which I hate to say, maybe I'm a little bit too outspoken. I don't quite get that out of my Vard. As capable as it is, as great as it is on a track, if it goes sideways on me being all of 150 pounds, that weight is chasing me, right? And I have to kind of really focus, and the intensity is always so high that I have a different experience on the track than you do when you're riding it. And so I want to make sure that everybody's kind of crystal clear. There's too many comments out there about like maybe Altus versus Dust, not realizing there's a pretty massive size difference in between these two bikes, with the Altus being closer to the seat height of a Light Beat or an E-Ride Pro, with the Dust being way more similar to an Ultra B size. And then a Vard seat height is still, what, 2-3 inches higher, almost 37-ish inches, which is a tall bike. Biggest difference being, what, about 45 pounds difference, probably, as it shakes out with the Hightail versus the 265-pound Vard.
Yeah. So, when we first started Dust, we had, coming from the industry a bit, we had the opportunity to try a lot of the bikes that were out there. That included the KTM Freeride. That's been out for quite a while, the Light B, the Ultra B, Storm B, the Stark. And one thing that resonated for us was sort of the mid-sized class that Freeride and Ultra B was really showing was it's an approachable size for a lot of people, a big range of people, including myself, about 5'7", as well as taller people wanting something that's a little bit more flickable and a little bit more kind of agile to throw around. But what we weren't seeing from those mid-sized bikes were the performance capability out of the box. And so we really loved what Stark was delivering, which was really high quality finishes, robust design and build, like real moto fitment on the parts, but then also really thinking about suspension performance and powertrain performance. And so we said, can we find a way to deliver a bike that gives the benefits of the mid-size class? And in a lot of ways, it's kind of like an old school 125, which is like the mindset that you get jumping on a bike like that is much more about fun and just going having a rip versus like I'm gonna go charge. Can we deliver that, you know, a benefit from the sizing, but also level up performance from what was out there in the market?
Yeah,
So,
and that's an interesting, I'd say, entirely new segment to the market, because a lot of people know I've raised an entire family, kids and wife and everybody on bikes. And I've always been searching for a more middle-sized bikes as the kids got older into the teenage years, or my wife started to want to ride, and there's just no choices out there. So if you go down the trail bike road, you get these pretty nice, comfortable mid-sized bikes, but they're extremely heavy. They have pretty bad suspension, and you know they're okay for the casual trail rider. But as soon as you want to start riding fast or even wanting to compete on them, they fall apart. So having these mid-sized bikes, I think, is so important for the market, and we are only finding good versions of these mid-sized bikes in the electric market.
yeah.
Starting with the Ultra B, or maybe starting with the KTM Freeride to be fair, and then the Ultra B, and then now the Dust.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think in the gas market, the evolution of kind of the more performance side of the bikes were that the motors started getting better and faster. You start getting liquid cooled, higher performance, or higher horsepower numbers. So then the suspension had to improve, getting longer travel suspension, more capable suspension. The chassis had to improve, get heavier. In order to tuck the wheel travel, fenders had to get higher. And so instead of having this crazy banana seat heights got higher, right? So you started to kind of chase this this performance spec to where now they're full-size bikes of today, 37 plus inch seat heights, really long travel, really capable motors. But it kind of left it, like everything evolved away from sort of that mid-size approachable class bike. And so, yeah, it's a cool opportunity in electric now. We're not beholden to any category, right? And one of the things we've been pretty clear about is we're not designing this bike to be a replacement of a gas bike for racing categories. So it's not like, okay, if someone's used to a 250, we need to make it feel like a 250. We said, what is the funnest, most approachable size that we could develop into a high performance machine? And we think this is the right size. It's, I would say, still full size bike, right? There's no great way to say it's still full size, and then it's got full size wheel tire package, and seat height is such that an adult up 6'4", 6'5" can ride it and not feel completely cramped. The way we've done peg and bar kind of relationships, it feels like a full size dirt bike. So,
and I think one last thing to comment on the size. There's a common misconception out there in the gas market. Well, just go buy a 125. It's smaller than the other bikes. It's actually not.
no longer.
If you look at seat heights across all the bikes, 125s, 250s, 350s, 450s, they're all the same. The chassis is the same. The seat height's the same. Dimensionally, they're the same. They're just making changes to obviously the motor and sometimes the suspension. And it's really more power output and slightly different weights and really how the power is delivered.
Yeah, what's interesting is the older 125s used to be a bit smaller than and I think there's a lot of kind of chassis commonality benefits, right, for manufacturing these things, and keep similar size frames and jigs, and you know, that way you don't have a huge spectrum of stuff in the supply chain. So.
Yeah, and what you really feel in the weight is actually the power delivery, right?
Yeah.
So like a 450 feels very heavy because you've just got a lot of movement, rotational mass. I'm doing a V-twin, by the way. I just realized that. I need to single piston big 450. But I just, you know, if we jump back on your Honda track bike, you feel all that weight versus jumping on your 300. Massive difference in the way that it feels. The weight's not really that different, is it? It's just all the power delivery.
Yeah. I actually want to rephrase that a little bit. So anybody pull up specs right now if you have a computer in front of you. Look at a KTM 350 and a KTM 300. On paper, they are almost identical, even in weight. Even though one's a 4-stroke, one's a 2-stroke, they're almost identical on paper. But you get on those two bikes, and you would swear that the 2-stroke 300 weighed 50 pounds less than the 4-stroke 350 or a 450. Even though on paper they look the same, but you get on them and you twist the throttle, they feel completely different. The 300 feels like a light play bike compared to a 4-stroke. And these electric bikes feel even lighter than the 300.
Yeah.
So I think a good important note on that is how many times have we been out trail riding and I've just wanted to get off my 350? Take this, trade it with me. And if I jumped on Brian's 300, it's like massive difference. It's
Yeah.
like the cheater bike version.
Yeah.
I just want to relate that back to the size difference, maybe again in between the VAR, 265 pounds, just being a lot of weight for a very track focused, professional level racer kind of capability, which takes me to the power delivery.
Yeah.
So few people can actually ride a VAR anywhere over a 60 horsepower limit. For myself, I have mine turned to 45 almost all the time, 45 horsepower.
Yeah.
Because if I do any more, I feel like I'm just going to high side myself. I'm going to whiskey throttle, the rear tire's going to spin, it's going to get away from me, right? We've seen a few people, professional racers, Josh Hill, Dustin Hill, they can go and they can milk it for all it's worth.
Yeah.
The general public cannot do that. So it's like a bragging right that's almost unattainable
Yeah.
in a way.
Yeah, and I think what we realized in doing some of the testing was sort of this idea of approachable performance and the concept. I don't know, maybe it's my namesake, but Colin Chapman, you know, founder of Lotus race cars, like just add lightness, right? And there's a lot of benefits to making a lighter bike beyond just power to weight ratio. I think power to weight ratio on our bike is great at 42 horsepower and under 220 pounds. But the other aspect is now your braking performance improves, your cornering performance improves. It's easier to load and unload out of your vehicle. If you dump it down the side of a hill, it's easier to pick it up.
Yeah.
Like if it falls over on you, it's less likely to, you know, you're tweaking an ankle or something like that.
Right.
And so we saw the benefit, and there are compromises. Like I think it's important to say, like we don't believe that you know, we're the best in every sort of facet. The compromise in trying to make a light bike in a lot of the electric side of things is battery.
Yep.
So you end up having to because basically battery directly drives weight and cost for a bike. And the unfortunate reality is if you want to get range, especially at higher power levels, you need a bigger battery. So we decided to try to find a compromise around making a swappable battery so that if people wanted range, they could swap in a battery. But we also decided to make the weight more approachable and sort of change the focus of the ride experiences. Let's opt for a slightly smaller battery so that it's more about having fun. It's more about ripping corners and, you know, kind of the playful, agile feel.
Yep.
And we can deliver the torque and the peak power to make it feel legit fast, you know, like a Stark set at 50.
Right.
It's how our bikes, you know, generally going to feel. So
So a lot of the comments obviously were about weight, and quite a few people said they were disappointed that the weight was up to 220. I do want to put that into perspective. We've kind of been talking about weights, and you know the Varg is up there at 265, fully charged. A 450 is not much below that. It's kind of the 255-ish range, if I remember correctly, with fuel in it.
yeah,
And then you have something like my 300 full of fuel is kind of the 235-ish range. And then one of our fully modified Ultra Bs you would have to build to compete against this is about the 235, 230 range. All of those bikes heavier than the Dust. And then you get down below the Dust and you're talking about a stock Ultra B, which significantly less power, less suspension, less battery.
wheel tires is the big
Wheels,
one.
tires. There's a lot of things that you have to kind of take off the list to get down to that weight. Then obviously you've got the smaller bikes below that. But even those smaller bikes are now up into the 180s now because they're putting out more power. And as we were talking, you mentioned that your original target kind of weight wise was more Ultra B, which is kind of the 185.
Yeah.
But you can't make it too light or with this amount of power, or because if you do, you're lacking range, you're lacking strength, you're lacking reliability. So what were some of the kind of decisions to get it up to that 220? Like how did you land on 220 as the ideal weight?
Yeah, it's pretty funny actually. Like if we went all the way back to when we first started Dust and sort of put our base spec on paper, like what are our targets? it was basically 190 pounds, 26 kilowatt. We weren't even fully locked on a 21-inch front, 18 or 19 rear. Like, we're still trying to sort that out. And even wheelbase would have been a bit more compact. And like, now in hindsight, you look at it, it's like pretty close to what the Altis and, you know, the Ventus bikes are coming in at, right? And as we started to test some of the modified bikes that were out there, and roughly in that weight class, there's a couple realizations that we had. The way that people were riding these modified bikes and like the size of jumps they're sending and the speeds they're hitting, we wanted to make sure that we were delivering the capability and suspension and you know, safety factors on chassis design, and also just general reliability. Like, you're hitting stuff this fast, this hard. We don't want the bikes to be sort of clapped out after, you know, 8 months of riding. We want it to be more like a traditional bike. The other piece I think is interesting is like this concept of over motoring the chassis. It's you see this actually in off-road racing sometimes. Like, you can only throw so much motor at a certain class of like an off-road race car, because otherwise now the suspension, the chassis can't handle it. You start breaking stuff, right? And also just the way that you ride it. Like, if you don't have you know, the quality of suspension, the wheel set, even the geometry to back up 30 plus horsepower on some of these modified bikes, you simply can't ride them super well. And so we went through this process of like, okay, how do we develop the best possible ride? How are people riding these things? And can we make sure that they're riding them safe, hitting the size stuff they want to hit, the speeds they want to hit? And then also a big thing was battery. Our original target was a 3.5 kilowatt hour battery. As we started to test even on the Alpha bikes, you know, we've had a couple different battery configurations, from a 2.8 kilowatt hour pack all the way up to the 4 kilowatt hour pack. We realized that 3.5 wasn't going to get it done. And that's ultimately why we ended up at the 4.4. And all these decisions add a little bit of weight. But from the beginning, it was always important for us to have the most kind of agile, flickable feeling bike. And so we didn't take it, you know, lightly, pun not intended. We didn't take the idea of adding weight lightly. Like, we wanted to make sure that it was the right decision. And so we were really intentional. It's still optimized on the chassis side of things. And wherever we gave up weight, we were making sure that it was done in a really intentional way, that, you know, okay, is this as much as is needed, not anything more. So yeah, it's basically trying to find that balance of like, okay, at this 42 horsepower and high torque, you know, range with highly capable suspension, and a chassis that will allow you to hammer at speed, you know, and a big piece of this is wheelbase and rake angle and all this stuff. What are the things needing to back up that performance? And yeah, you increment weight. And so yeah, we've worked with kind of our Founders 50 and First 100 customers, the crowdfund backers that are able to jump on calls with us and talk about these trade-offs and make sure that we're headed down the right path. So
I remember when we rode the Alpha for the very first time, Brett took it out on the track. It's almost like we came back and he was so excited, like, don't change a thing. You nailed it. Like, in the very first iteration, that was incredible, because how difficult that is to do. Especially coming from a background where we have built so many race-oriented Ultra Vs. It's super easy to see where the weight goes, because if you take an Ultra V as an example, great starting point for the price, right? $6,000 right now. Add in $1,000 wheels, add in, oh my gosh, let's go through this. If we were going to make a bike faster, we'd have to add wheels for $1,000, a controller for about $1,300 to $1,400, just to get the power up to where you feel like you're really pushing it and you can do more. And then if we take it out on a track, all of 2 laps, we're overheating the motor. So then you need another $1,400 for a new motor, and you're adding weight as you add each of these, right? You can only get so much out of an OEM battery, which is kind of where you are in the Alpha, similar to an Ultra V battery. And it's so easy to only get 15, 20 miles before the battery's completely done. So it's so easy to add weight, because you will pay more to get more range, to get more power, to get more capable out of the bike. I think my point in saying that is, if you were to try to go under 200 pounds, you're sacrificing strength and power and range every time you try to take away from it.
Yeah, you can't fight physics on some of this stuff.
You
like
can't.
copper is heavy and battery cells are heavy.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I would say something like, I want more range. Okay, add another row of cells.
Mhm.
You just added another 12 pounds.
Yep.
But it's worth it because you're getting another 10 miles of range, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I'm not at all worried about 220 pounds because we know it feels like the sweet spot. That Saranda build that we did with the Ultra B, it's easily 235, if not more. We'll have to pull it in and throw it on a scale just to see what that's like. So this is going to feel light, by comparison of that, right?
Yeah. I think the way I look at it is, I'm a person that loves the big bikes. I've raced almost every gas bike that there is. I still ride 450s a lot. I love my KTM 300. It's a red KTM with gas. But I also ride the electrics a lot. And so, when I'm on a motocross track and I'm riding electric, I love the Varg. It's such a great track bike. It can blow the doors off of a 450, which is a lot of fun. But the thought of the size and the weight of this, I think of my 300, not the 450, not really the Varg, because they are different. The 300 is more of a lightweight play fun bike. It puts a smile on my face every single time. And the thought of this being quite a bit lighter than my 300 after I add gas to it, and it being electric, which we call them cheater bikes all the time, especially when it comes to hard enduro TKO type stuff.
Yeah, woods riding. It's a revolution.
And so it's kind of like taking my 300, making it even more lighter, more playful, more fun. So I'm really excited about it. The 220 doesn't scare me at all.
It's an easy selling point for me because I have had the disadvantage of, with us being in the electric market and starting with so many small bikes, I've been riding too many 140-pound bikes, maybe 160 now. I think when we built your Light B up, Gold Member was 185. It was heavy at the time. Like you said a minute ago, Altus is that heavy. The E-Ride SR is that heavy. They're all 185 pounds plus now, but they're still in that small form factor, which can only be so capable. Until we start adding suspension, until we start adding 18, 21 wheels and all these things.
Swing arm, stretching.
Exactly, right? Because if you add too much power, you just wheelie every time uncontrollably and you can't put the power
Or
in.
we break them. How many of our small race bikes have we broken? All of them.
Every single one.
Many times, all of them. And some have led to injuries, unfortunately, which is, nobody wants that.
Yeah.
So I want to circle back around to price real quick. Just a minute ago, I built up to $12,000-$14,000 in an Ultra B. That wasn't even accounting for suspension. You add on something like $3,000 worth of Cirrus suspension, you're over $15,000. So for a lot of people, that might just rule out an Ultra B, and they'll say, well, forget it. I'm not going to build an Ultra B to that capability. I'm just going to buy a Varg. Right? So now here we are back to the discussion of the price point is similar enough today, but that might not mean that price point is the same later this year, because we don't know what's really happening with Varg came down in price, which sucks for me because I spent $15,000 on my Varg that I will now be selling for about 11 if anyone wants to buy it. But then they just introduced another new model, and that new model is now sitting at, I believe it's $12,900.
Yeah, the EX Enduro. Yeah.
Which kind of shows that the price is kind of coming back up a little bit.
Yeah, and for us is, I think it's fair. Like any time there's like a similar price, and if you simplify down kind of the specification, a lot of people are like, price and horsepower, like these are the only things that matter, right? And I think it's fair to look at that stuff. It's easier to talk about where the Varg is placed, right? It's like it's a 450 class bike, same size, same use case, right? These kind of class bikes are a little bit harder to describe, and like we've talked about in many different ways, it's like you wouldn't compare it to a 450, you would compare it to like a 125 or 300, and the benefits are being more light, flickable, different use case. And I think it's like horses for courses in a lot of ways. Like the people that choose this bike, hopefully after doing some research and as the 2025 starts and we start building more of our prototypes, like get a chance to try them, you'll realize that they're different. They have different characters, right? and again, we know what it costs to build an electric dirt bike. This is not purely driven by where we want the price to be. The best battery cells and materials for gearboxes and suspension, these things cost money. And so developing or delivering the performance and the reliability and the kind of quality of touch points, like we said, like we admire how Stark came to market and built that bike. Like, it's a beautiful bike and the touch points are amazing. We wanted to be able to build that and offer that. So this is a lasting kind of investment. People can ride it and resell it, and but also have different ride characteristic or ride quality that is more fun oriented, a little bit less race oriented. So
Yeah.
I think there is a very different use case for the full Stark Vard. I'm going to go race. I'm going to go beat 450s versus the more casual, more fun, more playful. They are two very different classes of bikes. And if I was to only own one bike, I would probably want something kind of like this, where it's more the middle size, lighter weight, more fun type of bike.
Yeah.
Unless I was a racer, then I might not.
Yeah. And I think that kind of hits on one of our target customers and how we expect it to live in the garage, so to speak, right? I think if you're an e-moto person, you're used to having an e-moto bike, and maybe you've upgraded them, you realize kind of the limits of the performance, and you wish you could get more out of the box and more reliable package. Like, I think we're an obvious opportunity, and we could replace your e-moto bikes, right? There's a lot of also crossover riders that have been wanting to ride moto, that have been intrigued, but gas bikes are a lot of maintenance and a lot of overhead. They're intimidating to learn, but they also don't want like a mini bike or something that's small or cramped or something. They want it to feel like a dirt bike. And I think we can be the bike that's the obvious kind of crossover sort of offering. It's quality, recognizable brand, and kind of being based in America and delivering performance but approachability. And then on the core moto side, the third customer base, this is the bike that's sort of the most fun to ride, and it's because it's electric and it's easy. You maybe ride it most often. It's like after work rides or your backyard track, or you escape up into the hills and you're kind of in stealth mode, right? And you probably, if you're a racer, you probably keep the race bike. You keep the bigger gas bike. The interesting kind of where it really becomes obvious actually is like, if you've got a backyard pit bike track, or your friend's got a pit bike track, how often are you going to load up the Varg and ride the pit bike track?
Yep.
It's like, you wouldn't, right? But on our bike, we've had our prototypes on a lot of different pit bike tracks, and that was like important for me. Is like, I really loved how the Light B created this movement of it's the new pit bike, and as we kept incrementing on design and even talking about adding weight, and I was like really keeping in the back of my head, like, I want our owners to still be able to rip a pit bike track and have fun. And so ultimately that slightly compact sizing and the weight and how the cockpit feels means that you can get this onto a typical pit bike track, have a ton of fun, like the more peaky doubles and like tighter corners, you can still get into it, whereas you probably wouldn't do that on a Stark, right? And so that, it's like, if you're a Stark owner, dude, that thing shreds on the track or on the kind of bigger kind of terrain, and then you can also have a Dust and and use it for the backyard track, and especially in single track. And so I think it plays a role in a lot of ways, and we tried to hit a lot of the categories effectively, and that's the beauty of electric. I think just ultimately, you all know this better than anyone, is you can get this Jekyll Hyde personality where you can make it super mellow and approachable with the right sizing. It feels good for a lot of people, and then you can kind of flip the switch and amp the mode up, and all of a sudden, for a pro level rider, they're loving it.
So if you don't mind, I want to transition back over to just pre-orders and a little bit of behind the scenes of what's been going on with, with your latest news. We've had a fantastic response from pre-orders. People are so excited that the bike's coming to fruition. They're ready to get out and test ride it when the next batch of bikes coming. So what does that look like a little bit? We kind of talked earlier that we rode bike number 1, and I believe bike number 2 is out in the van right now.
Yeah.
And then this is bike number 3?
Yeah. So bike number 1 was the very first build. We built it up, learned a bunch, instrumented it, and then we took it down so we could test the frame.
Yep.
Get some data on the frame, and also check has it been stretching and all that stuff. And then, yeah, 2 and now 3. And tons of learnings. I think one of the key things on these first alpha prototypes, first release prototypes was, is the experience fun? Is this sizing and kind of the powertrain performance targets all adding up to a great experience? And I think we really proved that, like, okay, we're onto something great here. And what that allowed us to do is then shift focus in developing the powertrain, because powertrain is sort of the most toothy, complex, labor intensive part of engineering these bikes. You got to get it right. And so we didn't want to commit too early in developing a powertrain for a platform that actually wasn't good or fun. And so we since running our crowdfunding campaigns and showing off the alpha bikes being tested, we've been heads down developing out the powertrain. And so once we got to the state of design near completion on our proprietary battery and motor gearbox, kind of locking down the powertrain spec, that's when we decided, hey, we're ready to go live with pre-orders, because we now know exactly what it's going to be. Right. And so now that these designs are basically, as we're here talking, the drawings are coming together and we're getting ready to release the next round of production prototypes, basically. So there'll be production intent bikes, and beginning of 2025, we'll start building those up and doing final validation testing to make sure that reliability is there, performance is there, the tuning on the modes and throttle mapping and all that stuff is solid and reliable and safe and all that stuff. And then we'll have more bikes available for demo and for kind of media usage, and for ambassadors to spend extended duration with these bikes and those sorts of things. So the idea is we get through that in the first half of next year, really put pedal to the metal basically, and work towards learning all those lessons and ramping up production, so that we can start to ship bikes sort of through the mid of next year. So
I think we can't leave behind the one thing that I'm kind of excited about. It's an American made. There's a bit of pride of that comes with it. We've seen others try and unfortunately fail, as they haven't kind of lasted. But there is no other great, especially mid-sized dirt bike, that's made in America right now.
Yeah, and we got to give shout out to Cobra. Cobra's killing it on the kids' bikes, and we love the team over there. They're great folks, and but otherwise, there's no other dirt bike basically, right? And it's important for us, I think. There's such a passionate customer base here in America. Like, it's the seat of moto culture, and the events and the athletes and the brands, in terms of accessory brands, all of the gear, and accessories for your bikes. A lot of it's, American companies, right? And so we said, oh man, there's no American moto brand, OEM. We can try to help fill that. And a piece of that is being connected with the community, showing up to events, tapping the audience with, kind of these pre-orders and crowdfund customers kind of pulled in development, sharing more on our platforms, and ultimately building bikes here in the States so that we can have closer control on quality and our suppliers. And even when it comes to being an early company, right? Like, God forbid there's an issue that we need to warranty or whatever, like, we're here in country and we can make sure that people get taken care of quickly.
That's huge in a world where I think you're not taking the easy way out and doing that, right? You probably could have traveled to China, other Asian countries, and found a factory that was willing to build you a bike, but then it would be halfway around the world, where you would have to basically move there, live there, in hopes to make it done, to do it right. Maybe to save a little bit of money, but then you would lose a lot of the core foundation of what that makes this bike.
Sort of peeling back, the curtains a little bit, I think it's interesting because there are more factories than you can count. Like, seeing the success of Suron and Teleria and all that stuff, now that's created a boom in factories in China building these bikes. And so you could quite literally jump on a plane right now and fly to the motorcycle city in China and start knocking on doors saying, I want to build an electric dirt bike. And they'll be like, which one do you like? Here's the catalog.
Right.
And you can say, I want this one. I want a little more power, and ship it next fall. And they'll get it done, right? But there are compromises to that. those factories don't know what ride quality is. They don't know what throttle mapping should feel like. They don't know, what it's like to come up short on a 50-foot double, and what that really means to the rider.
Right.
And so, yes, this is the long way around. We're developing all aspects of this bike, including the core components. We're sourcing the stuff that makes sense to source, pegs and bearings and pivot pins and chains and bars and grips. There's great stuff out there in the moto industry. We'll just use that stuff, right? But kind of the core stuff to the electric experience, the system integration, mapping throttles and controls and all that stuff. So yeah, it's not easier, but I think there's benefit there. And I think at the end of the day, that's kind of what separates us. I think Stark has done a great job taking a similar path. That's resulted in a bike that exceeds a lot of expectations initially when they launched in terms of what's capable of in performance. And I think we can kind of split the difference and deliver something that's really interesting and unique in a different category than what they're doing. So.
Yeah, I think that maybe is a little underappreciated how important it is that it's an American company and American thinking, because the whole reason that Charge Cycle Works exists is because when we first bought our first Sur-Ron 5 years ago, it's America. We want to make it American, and that means more power, faster, better, everything. Because these bikes weren't really made for the Chinese market, and so Charge Cycle Works exists because we take these bikes, we modify them, we make them into what America wants. And so to finally having a bike come out that is essentially what we build at a very high price point is super exciting.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And it's honestly, like, a lot of it has been us observing, right? Like what you all are doing and what other players, our friend Tucker and just what other players are learning about the industry and what people want and what people are buying. And we're designers, and a good designer looks to solve a problem, right? And we saw one of the challenges for people that were interested in this space was developing or upgrading a bike to kind of hit their performance needs and reliability needs. And they said, hey, there's something that we can build here that's meaningful, rather than create the solution and try to find the problem.
Right. One thing I just want to do is kind of circle back around, right? It's been a great chat. I'm so glad that you brought the bike down. As we're thinking about pre-orders, really the biggest value of that is you get to be part of the journey in a way, right? You get to get on the email list and you get to kind of see what's coming. You also will benefit from getting one of the first bikes as they actually come. So if you pre-order early, you get one of the first bikes. I did it with my VAR, got one of the first in the state. Brian, you did it with your Rivian, got one of the first ones on the road. And being part of that journey is just part of the fun, right? Yeah. But it's only $100.
And
deposit, I guess.
And we decided to do a thing that we thought was kind of cool. For sort of subsequent, if you wanted to stack two, you actually get a discount on the second one. And the reason there is we all know that riding with your buddies is the best. And so we wanted to make sure that whether it's your partner, your family member, or your friend, the opportunity to kind of get another one added on there, and you can keep going from there. So yeah, and a big piece of this is we want to develop the pre-order system hand in hand with our dealers, like you all. We know that some launches have been fraught when it comes to how the early pre-order customers were sort of pitted against the dealerships in terms of allocation. And so straight out of the gate, this is in partnership with our launch dealers and making sure that there isn't any weirdness about where your spot in line goes with respect to a dealer allocation and those sorts of things.
So I guess just coming back around to maybe, I don't know what to call it, quality to value of money of what you're spending. We got over $20,000 into Soranda, which is just a crazy amount of money. Pretty incredible how good that bike is. But most people would never spend 20 grand on an electric motorcycle. So here's the Dust, just as equally playful, perfect size for basically half of the cost of that. Kind of feels like a no-brainer. So I'm super excited to get my first bike so that I can get out on it. I'm looking forward to hopefully in just a few short months that I'm going to see a bike and I'm going to get to ride it. It's going to be hard to get it back from me.
Yeah.
Once I actually get my hands on it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And that's one of the hopes, is an out-of-the-box bike that performs, has the quality that you're really hoping to get with some of these upgrades. And you don't have to worry about needing to fix stuff or needing to improve stuff. It's just exactly what you want straight out of the gate. So.
Yeah, I think when our first Dust shows up, everybody at Charge Cycle Works is going to be fighting over who gets to ride this bike. It's going to be one of the favorites of the shop.
Is it shotgun? Do I call dibs?
We'll show up with more than one. How about that? Yeah.
Yeah, we better have more than one.
Yeah. Well, Colin, thanks again for coming. I appreciate you bringing the bike in. And again, I want a lot of people just to come in with their comments, their questions. Continue to ask those. We'll continue to give as much feedback as we can, especially as we follow along the journey of us coming closer and closer to getting our next bike.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun, and always love coming to visit you also. Thanks.